So for the 3 feats with damage types, this is the first time we get feats that specifically incentivize characters to stick with a specific like physical damage type, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. The thing with all 3 of these is that they all score, when you score a critical hit, they do very different things. So Crusher, attack rolls against the creature that you crit against have advantage, so it's a little bit of a buff to your allies. Piercer, you get an additional damage die, and Slasher, the creature that you crit against has disadvantage on their attack rolls. Now, one of the things that Tasha's has been criticized for, which I think is actually valid criticism and something that DMs should take into account, is the introduction of power creep. Anytime we get a book with more options, it's going to introduce an element of power creep into the game. Power creep being newer options tend to be a little bit more powerful than the options that we had previously. And, you know, when Xanathar's Guide was released, we had some subclass options that were more powerful than that presented in the player's handbook. I'm thinking specifically like the Sorcerer and Warlock options were really, really good in Xanathar's, you know? But with Tasha's, some of these options are so good, they invalidate some of the player's handbook options. So like now that we have like Path of the Beast and Path of Wild Magic, why would you be a Berserker Barbarian, where you're starting to take levels of exhaustion just for an extra bonus action melee attack, you know? One of the things I do like about these feats, though, is that in a way, they start to incentivize some builds that were classically less powerful into being a little more competitive now. So the reason I wanted to touch on these 3 feats in particular, these now make the champion a more viable character type. Because champion used to have just, you get to crit more often. There were some specific builds you could do with, say, Savage Attackers from Half Orc and, say, like some of the higher level Brutal Critical from Barbarian to do kind of like a Crit Fisher build. Ultimately, it was you're increasing your chances to do more damage. Now with this adds a tactical element to why you would want a critical hit more often. And the champion now is the only class that consistently allows you to have a greater critical hit chance. Hex Blade Warlock has a little bit of that, where with the Hex Blade's curse allows you to have a bigger crit chance, but like a 15th level champion has a superior critical. They crit on an 18 through 20. They have a 15% crit chance. And combining that with something like Piercer, Slasher, or Crusher, now that crit is more powerful in a way that's more than just damage, unless it's Piercer. But let's be honest, if you're going to take Piercer, why wouldn't you also take Polar Master or Sentinel? Like if anything, that this book has made Fighter a much more interesting character than it was before, because Fighter used to be, Battle Master's the interesting one. The other ones have their place, but they're kind of but the rest of these now, it just makes it a little bit more interesting, and now you get to really think through the function you want out of your character, you know? So like, to bring it back to Crusher a little bit, with Crusher, if you hit a creature with bludgeoning damage, you can move it. If it's Slasher and you slash a creature, you can reduce its speed. Now you're making a tactical choice from a build perspective. Do I want to be able to move people, or do I want to lock them down, or do I want to re-roll do I want to just focus on damage because Polar Master and Sentinel add that tactical element in a different place? So the thing I like about these feats is it allows you to reevaluate a lot of the older classes and find new creative ways to keep them relevant. One way, I call them the multi-class feats, but they're more the initiate feats. You get a few of them in here, like Artificer Initiate, Eldritch Adept, Fighting Initiate, and Meta Magic Adept, where really it's like, excuse me, it's like, do you want a little bit of what this class offered? Do you want an Eldritch Invocation, or some meta magic options, or a fighting style? Now you don't have to invest in another class level in order to get a little bit of access to that. But the other thing that now does, it also allows you to double down a lot more on the classes that you really like. So I would take Meta Magic Adept as a sorcerer, because now I have more options and more sorcery points as a sorcerer. And if I've got a decent charisma in con and I hit one of those ASI levels, why wouldn't I want to be better at the things I already like doing, you know? So from the optimizer's perspective, I can see why these feats can be more powerful, but I just love the way that you can mix and match the build options, not because they're more powerful, but now your character's story might be a little more interesting because they have a little bit of this extra little flavor that has a functional place in your party's composition.
This also, by having more options for these fighters, it lends a lot more value to all of those multiple ability score increases that you have, where normally we're like, yeah, we want to be able to customize the fighter, but everyone has access to those feats. So this allows, I would dare say, only the fighter is the one that has enough options to really personalize using these feats. They're the ones that really do have functional access because they get so many more ASIs as opposed to everyone else. The rogue is another slight possibility because they get, I think it's 1 or 2, it might be 1, just additional ASI early on. I think it's 6th level that they get an extra one, or, oh, it's 10th, excuse me. But it's, oops. In my defense, I did just build an entire class from scratch that has an ASI at 6th. And they're one of their parent classes is the rogue. So whoopsie, but yeah, exactly. So 10th level, you get another ASI, but that lends you some ability to wiggle room to start taking advantage of some of these, which I find really interesting when it comes to builds, because sometimes we see feats and we go, no one's ever going to take that. Why do we have that? Well, hyper-specific situation, yeah, you take that. But it's really fun to see if a feat can be general and specific. That there's a lot of general options and moments that you could use this, and you have the ability to make it a tactical specificity. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, and what I find really cool is that these are all feats, and usually you take a feat instead of your ASI, unless you're doing like a variant human build. But a lot of these feats from Tasha's, they usually give you at least a small stat bump anyway, so you are incentivized to skip the ASI because you get kind of part of like the best of one world and at least part of the other good world of the ASI bump. And I also like how that allows for more flavorful expressions of your characters when you're taking your feat, because a lot of these feats have really cool flavorful ideas around them, and if you're really into roleplay, you might be interested in taking one of them, but you also might be not wanting to become unoptimized or something like that. So with all these ability score bumps of like, and a lot of them are like your choice, or at least have a wide spread of intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, you don't really sacrifice too much to gain the benefits of this feat, and I think that's really nice.
So starting off right out of the gate is the Poisoner. Now we've seen the poisoning kit in, of course, the the player's handbook. It's right at the onset of the game's mechanics. However, in play, in practice, I don't get to see a lot of poisons in terms of their specific qualities. And there are poisons that exist. And we can find them in a number of online resources. There's a lot of third-party publications that start to delve deep into poisons. But again, we want like official publication. And when we deal with poison, it's a general idea of you are now poisoned. Now, Poisoner follows that track. You put it in 1 minute, and then you hit them, and it will slide off of the weapon into them, and then it's gone. However, that's cool. When a creature takes damage from the coded weapon or ammunition, that creature must succeed on a DC 14 Constitution saving throw or take 2d8 poison damage and become poisoned until the end of your next turn. Hello, Way of Mercy. And any other creatures that would benefit greatly from an enemy being poisoned. As we really delve deeper into the expansions of the game state and all of our rules, we're getting a lot more options that are going deeper and deeper into the poisoned condition and how effective that is and how it can set up your allies tremendously.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.